Good evening, everyone. We are going to call tonight's meeting to order. I'd like to start with an approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Stevens. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there is a recommendation that a closed meeting of council be held pursuant to Section 239, subsection 2 of the Municipal Act for the purposes of considering the following subject matters: the closed meeting minutes from July 14th, a request for acquisition of surplus town lands, which is a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, and a committee recruitment update, which is personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Can I have a mover and a seconder to go into closed? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Prendergast, all in favor? And that is carried. We are now in closed session. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's meeting. We are going to move into the open portion of our meeting. We did start with a closed session, and I will read the rise and report shortly. But before we do, we will start with the singing of our national anthem. I'll ask that you rise if you're able.
O Canada, a home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. Tonight's meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Ahead of tonight's open meeting, we did have a closed session, and the recommendation coming out of closed is that the minutes of the July 14th, 2025 closed council meeting be approved, and that council declare the lands described as Block A and RA1 as referenced in staff report INS 2025-32, abutting 61 College Avenue as surplus to municipal needs, and that council directs staff to proceed with the required notice for the disposition of the declared lands, and that upon receipt of the resignations from the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee, council appoint Amy O'Connor, Lily Woon-Fat, Hope Sousa, Dia Shah, and upon verification of eligibility, Chaitanya Chandler to the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee for the remainder of the council term, and that staff proceed as directed. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. We do have minutes from our previous council meeting of July 14th, 2025. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive those minutes, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Prendergast, any questions or comments? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. We will now move into the open forum. Any member of the public that's connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Raylene, was there anybody on the call? No, there was nobody there. So we will move to anybody in the gallery who wish to ask a question, and a reminder that you need to give your name and address for the record and that you do have a maximum of 3 minutes to address council. Was there anybody in the gallery who wished to ask a question? Yeah, come on up, Matthew. Name and address for the record, please, and then you can go ahead.
Matthew Smith, 38 McCarthy Street. I'd like to speak about the speed camera report that's coming to council tonight. And I'm really struggling to understand the recommendation for it, for 2 cameras at Spencer and Alder. I feel the data that's been made available to the public is quite fragmented, and there's been a couple contradictory statements that have been made as well, which really add to the confusion I have. I can't really have an informed opinion about this with everything that's been presented as it is. So at the August 12th, 2024 council meeting, I asked if a speed study was conducted on Spencer Avenue. And the response from a council member was, yes, it showed speeding wasn't an issue. It was close, but didn't warrant further traffic changes. And then a staff response was 3 out of 1,000 cars were above 60 kilometers an hour. And council asked as well, at what point speeding was a concern? And the staff response was 5 or 6%. And fast forward a few months to October 2020, October 21st, 2024 council meeting, the speed report for Zina and Elizabeth Street was released. 9% of cars on Zina were above 50 and 0.3% of cars were above 60. So that report concluded saying there was no problem with 0.3% and concluded saying that 9% of cars above 50 had no issues. And at that meeting, again, a council member expressed frustration for the lack of traffic calming implementation in town. So my confusion here is with 0.3% for both Zina and Spencer Avenue not having a problem, the staff recommendation is to put a camera on Spencer Avenue and Alder, but apparently there's no problem with those numbers, and I can't understand that. And maybe we can get some clarification later about that. And there's also a recommendation for Alder. I haven't seen any public data for Alder. So I would have difficulty coming to a decision to put a camera at Alder with zero information available about it. It hasn't been presented as far as I know. And I'd also like to know, why was the recommendation just specifically for cameras? Why wasn't there a traffic calming recommendation? That's something that was brought forward to the previous term of council in 2021 about traffic calming. So that's something that we could implement here in town as opposed to a camera. And also for the cameras, I believe the break-even point is 45 vehicles per month. So that means if less are caught, is a financial failure, but a success in slowing down drivers. If more than 45 are caught, is that considered a financial success, but a safety failure? Made it.
Mr. Delis, do you want to take this one, or Mr. Koslak? Either or, go ahead.
I can certainly start. Thank you, Your Worship. There's a number of issues and points that have been brought up there, and let me start by saying, let's start in the reverse order. Two things can be true at the same time. Certainly, there are vehicles, we don't believe there to be a speeding issue on Alder and Spencer, because 85% of the vehicles are traveling within the speed limit. That said, the AAC program is targeted at those offenders. The latest data that we had to prepare as part of a process with LAS is to determine how many vehicles were actually speeding. And speeding is a relative term. Is 41 speeding? Technically it is. Is 51 speeding in a 40? Yes, it is. So at the same time, two things can be true. So what we found in the data that we collected after the endorsement of council in March 2025 was that approximately 3 to 4% of the people or the motorists on Alder Street and on Spencer Avenue were speeding above 55 kilometers an hour. So this program is designed to, depending on how you set the parameters, designed to capture the worst offenders. Now, if we certainly could set the parameters or the data at 41, but that wouldn't be prudent because there's a number of other factors. There'll be disputes that we just can't handle, those type of things. So there will be a point where we set the cameras for the required speed, whether that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 kilometers over, that's still to be determined, and we'll make that determination based on the data that we have. But certainly I want to leave you with this, that two things can be true at the same time, and certainly the cameras are not there to be financially beneficial to the municipality. They're there to be effective in curbing habits that speeders have, especially through school zones like Spencer, and especially through places that have parks like Alder, arenas, churches, and of course another high school and elementary school. So that was our recommendation that was made. The other thing that I just want to end on, and I'll try to make this as quick as possible, is that when we looked at Spencer, we didn't want to do one without the other because we didn't want to push traffic off of Spencer onto Alder or vice versa. So that was another consideration that we brought forth in that council meeting of March 2025, and council agreed with our recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Delis. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Was there anybody else in the gallery who wished to ask a question? Hello, Mr. Felice, good to see you. If you can just give your name and address for the record, and then you can go ahead. You've got 3 minutes to ask your question.
How much? 3 minutes? After 53 years, I get only 3 minutes?
Absolutely.
I paid all the taxes for 53 years. I didn't know it was 3 minutes. I thought it was 5.
You got 3.
My name is Max Felice, and I reside at 21 Ontario Street in Orangeville here, L9W2T9. I came here today to say thank you to the corporation town of Orangeville. After 8 years of me bitching about safety on Ontario Street, it's almost finished. 99% is done. But I'm very happy to see the work being done properly, and the people that did the job did a very good job. That is Windale Paving, and they were very courteous, because when the garbage could not be collected as usual, they came with the front loaders, took our bin from in front of the house and put it on Princess Street, and when it was empty, they brought it back until they could have the fare through for the bus. So that was really very, very good from that company. One more thing that I have a problem here, small problem. 3.5 weeks ago, they pulled the light post from in front of my house. There's one between 19 and 21 Ontario Street. And that was moved 2.5 feet or a foot and a half, whatever. They came in, and in 4 or 5 hours, they took one out, and they went away, they came back, and they put the other one in. And they didn't hook it up. But I expected that as soon as the road was finished, which was only a week later after they done this part, because they were doing this just before the sidewalk was finished. And today, 3.5 weeks later, we are still in the very dark. And I would like to see, number one, that the town of Orangeville that owns this corporation and own the hydro will tell me if there was any plan to install this back. But the thing is, there's a post, but there is no arm and no light on it. So I would like to see that this is done. And if one of you would like to come at night, any night, to see how hard it is to see, and that was out when the road was in construction. It was really dangerous, very dangerous. So I'd like to say thank you again, and hope you guys carry on, because you have a lot of work being done in town, and I could see that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Felice. And after I saw you on Saturday, I did reach out to our manager of Capital Works. He responded back to me today about your light post, that he is working with Hydro right now to get that addressed. So it is being taken care of. So stay tuned, and we'll be able to provide you an update soon.
The earliest day you guys gathered together here.
Yep, I've already taken care of it for you, so somebody's on it.
Do I have any more minutes left?
No, you're done. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Felice. Thanks for coming out tonight. Mr. Ugolini, go ahead. Name and address for the record. And again, a reminder, you've got 3 minutes.
Good evening, town staff and council members. My name is Rick Ugolini, Cedar Drive, Orangeville. I have a couple questions. One, why is it taking so long to get the phone system up and working at the town hall here? And two, why is Orangeville so special we don't have a fire ban going on when all the communities around us have fire bans going on? Does Orangeville have a special curtain that goes up if a fire comes nearby or smoke? I'm just don't understand it. Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you. Ms. Minikilo, do you want to start first with the phone system, and then I'll turn over to Ms. Savage for the fire ban?
Yes, thank you through you, Mayor Post. Mr. Ugolini, thank you for your question about the phone system. What essentially we're doing is we're taking this opportunity to look at how to optimize our phone systems. So as part of the 2025 budget process last year, we had set aside some funds to look at potentially optimizing the efficiency of our phone systems to modernize it. And so this opportunity really gave us the chance to look at that right now. So part of the time that's being invested is how do we streamline our system? How do we reduce inefficiencies that existed? How do we align with how our customers, our residents, people in our community actually need customer service now? So we've been using reports and data taken from our customer service team to align and reinvest in our future phone systems in a way that serves the community and the way the organization works better. So we took this really as a strategic opportunity to look at the whole phone system, achieve some efficiencies, hopefully some cost savings in reducing total number of lines and things of that nature, and really took that to make a better system for our future, drive some cost efficiencies, and improve customer service to the residents of Orangeville. So that's why the phone system is taking longer. We're using it as an opportunity. Instead of replacing like with like, let's use this opportunity to modernize it and see where we can drive financial efficiencies and better outcomes for the community.
Thank you, Ms. Minikilo. Go ahead.
Is there any timeline in this whole system, or is it going months and months and months?
No. Thank you for that. Through you, Mayor Post, the timeline we're working with is September, so very soon.
Thank you. Ms. Savage?
Thank you, Mayor Post. Mr. Ugolini. About the fire ban, Chief Snyder's been working closely with the other Dufferin chiefs, and the decision to not implement a fire ban in Orangeville is based on multiple factors. We have a very comprehensive burn permit program here that prescribes who can burn, who can't. We don't have open space in rural areas like our other areas do. And our burn permit program is only for recreational use, whereas the other municipalities may be for other purposes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Ugolini. Was there anybody else in the gallery wishing to ask a question? Okay, we will move then into presentations, petitions, and delegations. I would like to invite up Murray Short from RLB with the 2024 audited financial statements. Mr. Short, good to see you. We'll get you set up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to present the financial statement presentation that we have in the council package. As we have in the past, my intention is to cover the PowerPoint slides that were on pages 29 to 56 of council package. They do cover the primary financial statement, so I won't then go through the financial statements that start on page number 62. But of course, if there are any questions on the statements that I haven't covered in the PowerPoint presentation, then I will happily do my best to answer those. First off, thank you to finance staff for their good work over the course of the year, but also kind of getting us to this point where we're ready to present the draft financial statements. I will kind of start with the agenda for my presentation, talk a little bit about the audit in terms of how the audit went, touch on our audit report. It is a clean audit opinion, not to play a spoiler early. Walk through the financial statements, which include the graphs that we've presented in the past that kind of give some picture to the numbers that you will see, and then just talk about next steps in terms of wrapping things up here. So with that said, this first slide talks about the audit process. I can summarize most of it by saying that there was communication that went to council last fall, where we talked about our audit plan and what our kind of anticipation was for the audit process, and there were no significant changes in that audit plan. So materiality is consistent with what we had said. It would be no changes in the audit risks and areas of focus for our audit. The adjusting entries and unadjusted differences are consistent with what we would expect to see. So those are just kind of provided for informational purposes, but it's kind of the entries that we would expect to make related to tangible capital asset activity, consolidation of Orangeville Hydro, and so on. Although I will mention we did have one prior period adjustment, which is noted in the financial statements related to the water pollution control plant, which had been continued to be on the books as an asset in process, although it was completed a number of years ago. And so we had to adjust for that to correct for that asset being put into place a few years ago. Otherwise, pretty consistent entries to what we would expect to have had in previous years. The audit report is included in council package, again, within the financial statements themselves. It's a 2-page report, but I can summarize it by basically saying it is a clean audit opinion. So we've done what we've needed to do in order to satisfy ourselves that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. The statement of financial position is otherwise known as the balance sheet for the organization, showing the financial assets, liabilities, and non-financial assets. And at the bottom, the accumulated surplus. It is a little bit small on screen, so I apologize. But I will just talk about a few key numbers on this statement. If you look at the top 3 lines collectively under financial assets, they are cash, restricted cash, and temporary investments. Collectively, they're down somewhat from last year. So last year they were about 102 million if you add those top 3 lines together. At the end of 2024, they were down to about 98.6 million. So a decrease of about 3.4 million, largely because of capital asset activity, but also changes in other factors, accounts receivable, changes in working capital, and so on. In the liability section, you will see that accounts payable, that top line under liabilities, is up by about $2 million or close to it. Again, largely related to capital, with more activity happening in 2024 versus 2023. That is also the explanation for deferred revenue being down. So deferred revenue are some of your reserve funds, primarily development charges, gas tax reserve funds, and so on. We will see that in a future slide, but you did draw on those in order to fund some of that capital asset activity in the year. The net financial asset number you see about 2/3 of the way down the page. You can see that balance has actually increased despite the capital asset activity. So you are generating positive cash flow from operations that were more than enough to offset the purchases in capital assets that are down just below the tangible capital asset line. So about 25 million spent on capital assets in the year versus amortization of about 8.6 means your capital asset balance has increased by about $16.4 million on the year. So down at the very bottom of this page, we have the accumulated surplus. You can see that balance is up by about $18 million. That also corresponds to the amount of capital asset activity that you had in the year. Basically, in years where there's significant capital asset purchases, you're funding that either from development charges in some of your reserve funds. You may be funding it from grants, which we'll see when we get to the statement of operations. Those contribute to your bottom line, but the amortization of those assets hasn't occurred yet. So in years where you invest significantly in capital assets, you tend to show a stronger bottom line, a stronger surplus on the year, although that might sound counterintuitive. So getting to some of the graphs that we have, this graph shows cash equivalents as compared to various other municipalities. Because the town of Orangeville is larger than all of our other municipal clients, we use different reference points in your case than using our client base, which wouldn't really be a reasonable comparison. So we're looking at comparators being Bradford, West Gwillimbury, Centre, Wellington, Leamington, Whitchurch, Stouffville, Wilmot, Woodstock, and Woolwich townships as being fairly comparably sized and with kind of relatively similar financial pictures. And so comparing your cash position to those comparators, you can see the green line being higher than the blue one means that you are tend to have more cash on hand than those municipalities do relative to your cash outflows. When we see your reserves and reserve funds, that will kind of paint the same picture. You basically are holding more in reserves and reserve funds than those municipalities, which I think sets the municipality up well for the future. The bars, starting from the bottom and going up, the yellow ones are your cash outflows, the green ones are your actual cash equivalents, so it's just showing that relative proportion. This year, about 121% of your cash outflows are held in cash at the end of the year. Taxes receivable, we are seeing not just against this comparator group, but against most of our municipal clients that has crept up over the years, and that seems to be the case across the board for most municipalities in Ontario. So you can see that starting in 2021 in the case of your municipality, but also the comparators. The fact that your municipality's percentage of total tax levied is only 5.8% at the end of this year, still stronger than most municipalities and certainly stronger than the comparator group. So I think that speaks well to the collections efforts of your staff to try and keep that balance at a reasonable level. Anything less than 10% would be what the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing would consider to be low risk. So at 5.8, you're in a good financial position from that standpoint. Long-term debt as a percentage of total tax revenue. So to try and normalize for the size of the municipality, in this case, we're looking at total tax revenue just as a comparison. Your debt level has been slightly higher, but fairly consistent with the comparator group, as you can see. And in 2024, really narrowing that gap quite significantly. It's about 65% versus 63% for the other municipalities. So very comparable in terms of your debt position at the end of 2024. Tangible capital assets. So this is showing additions as a percentage of total tax revenue. Your numbers tend to be lower. I think this might be one case where the comparator group maybe isn't a fair comparison. They tend to be, although they are similar sized in terms of population, tend to be kind of bigger rural municipalities, and therefore their infrastructure needs may be greater. I can't say that for sure across the board, but I don't really like to compare capital asset additions between municipalities. Every municipality's needs are different, and so it's a hard comparison to make. But this does show that over the last 5 years, you do tend to spend less, but that's not, again, not an indication of what you should have spent over that time, to be clear. This graph shows capital asset additions versus what was budgeted and versus amortization. You can see the budgeted amounts tend to be significantly higher. That's not surprising. That's pretty consistent with our other municipal clients. Reason for that, as I probably mentioned last year, projects get deferred, projects proceed, on their own pace and not necessarily the pace you're budgeting them. And so what happens when you budget for a project to happen in 1 year and it doesn't, then it goes into your capital budget for the next year. So it's kind of counted more than one time in some cases in your budget numbers, but the actuals then are what they're going to be. I think the better comparison is looking at the blue versus the yellow bars in each case being the amortization, the blue being your additions. So comparing those two gives maybe a better indication that you're doing what you can to stay on top of your infrastructure needs. So ignoring what other municipalities have invested, the fact that the blue bar is above the yellow one, and a fair amount in most of the last 5 years, I think is a good indication. So the statement of operations shows the revenues and expenses for the year, culminating in the accumulated surplus and the annual surplus at the end of the year. And so that statement is shown here. A few comments here. You can see taxation revenue is up by about 5%. A little below budget as it winds up, but up by about 5% from the prior year. Fees and user charges up about 900,000 or so. And then grants and other income. This is where the capital activity comes in again. So grants, you can see, have increased by about $2.2 million over the prior year, again, because of capital grants received in the year. Other income is also up. That's because you drew more out of those reserve funds, particularly development charges, and we'll see that in a future slide. But that does come into income, and it's funding your capital asset activity as well. So total revenue is up to $80.4 million as a result of that capital asset activity. Down below, you see expenditures actually down slightly from last year, about 1% down year over year. A few of the changes there, in particular, protection services, you can see that expense line is down about $3 million. That's because of your OPP contract and a reduction in your OPP billings, which council would be aware of, but worth mentioning. Some of the other expenses, you see a bit of an increase in general government. That's primarily staffing, just with kind of catching up on some vacancies from the past. Transportation services down because of professional fees, but environmental services up because of professional fees. So just kind of the variances that you'd expect to see from 1 year to the next. So with revenues being up and expenditures being down, you have an annual surplus this year of $18.28 million. That sounds like a lot. I will point out that is not your operating surplus on the year. And again, it's augmented by the fact that you've purchased a fair amount of capital assets. All of the funding comes into revenue, but it's only the amortization that's hitting your expense. And so really that includes the unamortized portion of the assets you basically invested in the current year. So just looking at expenditures by department, this shows kind of across the various departments, the total percentage of the total. You can see being a kind of a diversified municipality, you have kind of a good mix with other smaller municipalities. Transportation services tends to be kind of up in the 40-50% range. In your case, it's at about 17% with protection and environmental services having a greater percentage of the total. And you can see that here, this is just showing the 5-year comparisons for those. So the statement of changes in net financial assets takes that $18.3 million surplus that I mentioned and then adjusts to take out the capital asset activity. And so you can see when you back out the purchase of capital assets and amortization, that brings the number down quite significantly. And so your net financial asset position did increase by almost 1.5 million, but that obviously not quite different from the 18 plus $1 million surplus year over year. So lastly, the statement of cash flows is the last primary statement. I won't go through this in any detail other than to point out a few key numbers. So almost halfway down the page, you see 22.7 million being the positive cash flow from your operating activities. So you're generating positive cash from operations, being your revenue generation, taxes, and so on. From that, then you have your financing activity, so repayments of debt, which you did to the tune of about 2.76 million. Capital asset activities, $25 million spent on capital assets, but you did sell various assets that generated $1.2 million of net cash. And then dividends received from Orangeville Hydro. And so the net of those things is your cash position decreased by about 3.42 million. So then we have the schedule of accumulated surplus. So this takes the 309 million that we saw at the bottom of the statement of financial position and breaks it out. Most notably, your investment in capital assets is the most significant component of that. That is part of your accumulated surplus in municipal accounting. So that's 243 million. You can see various other balances, unfunded liabilities related to the debt that you just pay on a current basis each year. Tangible capital assets to be financed in future, unfunded post-employment benefits, and so on. But down below then you have reserves and reserve funds. And you can see these ones are down by about 1.9 million. So the 80 million right near the bottom versus the 81.9, those are your discretionary reserves and reserve funds set aside by council. They do not include the development charges and gas tax and so on that we'll see on a future slide. These are the reserves and reserve funds council has set aside in the past for various purposes. So then we have deferred revenue. So this is the obligatory reserve funds, so the development charges and so on. This is shown as a liability as opposed to part of the accumulated surplus because you are restricted by the Development Charges Act, gas tax agreements, and so on. And so they are kind of required to be spent on specific purposes. And this is where we see a lot of that capital funding coming into play. The development charges, you can see about 3.57 million spent out of those. That's hitting your revenues to fund some of those capital asset purchases. Same thing with the transportation grants and federal gas tax lines, significantly drawn down to fund some of those asset purchases. So the last graph is showing your reserves and reserve funds as a percentage of total tax revenue. Again, this is comparing you to that comparator municipal group. And again, the green line being the town of Orangeville at 227% versus 201%. That kind of highlights or ties to the fact that your cash position was stronger than those municipalities as well. You have more set aside in reserves and reserve funds that's going to augment your cash. So again, the municipality, I think, to summarize all of these graphs, I think you're in a good financial position, well set to kind of, maintain your infrastructure going into the future. Your reserves and reserve funds seem to be in a good spot. So just in terms of next steps, we will, as part of this presentation, we would ask the council approve the draft financial statements. We will then have your Director of Finance sign the management letter subject to your approval today, and that will then allow us to submit the financial information return on your behalf to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So with that said, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Short. If you want to hang out there for a second, I'm just going to get the motion put on the floor, and then I'll open up the floor to questions from council. The recommendation is that report CPS 2025-67, the 2024 audited financial statements be received, and that council approve the 2024 audited consolidated financial statements of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville and the statements of trust funds as presented. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor. And if there are any questions, you can add yourself to the queue. Councillor Andrews, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity to ask Mr. Short a question. First and foremost, always detailed. Again, we only saw you a few weeks ago, if I recall, at the library board and providing the audited statements there, and always great detail. One thing that really struck a chord with me, and of course, numbers are numbers, and for some people, this is almost like looking at the lottery sometimes when you're looking at the figures that we're talking about. But more specifically, I'm looking at one that I have here, deferred revenue. And this is on page 51 of the council report. Building permits and development charges. In our particular case, revenue, one of our sources of revenue is in fact development charges. You referenced the comparators, other municipalities. Did you see a trend also in some of your other municipalities where building permits were down, development charges were down? Is that just something that we're dealing with from a cyclical point of view, what's happening in, other municipalities at this point?
Yeah, it's
Mr. Short? Yeah, we just need your mic. Perfect.
There we go. I think it tends to be cyclical, and it seems to vary by municipality. So I'm not sure that I could say that across the board they all tend to be down. Certain of our municipal clients, we're seeing kind of a significant increase in some of their DCs. I think it just kind of depends on the kind of activity in one spot versus another. So I don't know that I could kind of confirm that or suggest that that's the case.
It was not intended to put you on the spot
No,
again.
it's
It just, I'm looking at, I'm looking at these figures as we were, prepping for the meeting today, and again, watching what's happening in other municipalities. This is, we've discussed this, as you know, through your worship. We've discussed this at council, and I think that this is something that we have to keep our eyes on. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Short.
Councillor Sherwood, the floor is yours.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Nice to see you again, Mr. Short. So one of the things that attracted me, of course, in your original presentation was a surplus of 18.3 million, which got me quite excited until I started seeing it dwindling down. The bottom line is, and I'm going to just get confirmation that the ending surplus ends up being 5.325 million, because that's usually what we're looking for, is just what the bottom line is. I'm going by the staff report, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a difference in what we're showing just because of what's included in the staff report, but yes, it's definitely in that ballpark. Yeah. Yeah, what we're showing in the statements as the operating surplus or general surplus is 6.6. So it's in that ballpark. I would have to confirm with your finance staff what the difference is between the 6.6 and the 5.3.
Yeah, that's a significant difference.
For sure.
Can we get clarification from that? Perhaps?
I think Ms. Braun is online. Yeah. Ms. Braun, if you're there, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Mayor Post, through you to Councillor Sherwood. Yes, there is a slight difference, but well, not a slight. There's a very big difference between the accounting surplus, according to the financial statements, and the budget surplus, according to our actual annual budget process. So as Mr. Short had explained, some of the differences are On the financial statement side, the surplus takes into account investments in capital assets, less amortization. And on our operating budget side, our operating budget's only speaking to operating budget numbers. It doesn't take into account anything happening on the capital side. So it's looking at our tax revenues and our water and user rate revenues, less our operating expenditures. And that's the operating surplus for both of those budgets. So it is very confusing. I'm not sure if there's a better way to kind of reconcile the two numbers, but in the staff report, we are reporting that previously our Q4 report for 2024 had a surplus for the budget of 5.3 million, as you had stated, Councillor Sherwood. But now with some of the year-end entries and corrections, we're now showing a budget surplus of, I believe, 6.8 million. That was identified in the staff report. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question. It is a bit, so sorry, I'm getting a little bit of an amendment here. There is, I think it's 5.2 on the tax side, and then the rest is for the user rate budget. But total operating budget surplus was 6.8 million.
6.8. And is that on a specific page in the financial statements?
No, so that again, there is a difference between the calculation for financial statement purposes and for budget, I'll say, purposes. We budget on a cash flow basis. So when we have tax revenues and cash outlays, we calculate those sorts of things as our surplus. For the financial statements, they include things like investments in capital assets. So when you buy, say you buy an asset for $1 million, you're not going to amortize that $1 million, but you've spent the money. That is considered part of your accumulated surplus, I believe. Is that correct, Murray?
Yes, that's correct. There is a number in the statements on Schedule 3, which is the schedule of accumulated surplus, that's 6.68 million. So that's pretty close to the 6.8 that your treasurer is referencing.
Thank you. Yeah, I just saw a bunch of numbers dancing in my head, and
Yeah.
I just wanted to know that bottom line after we get through
Yeah,
all the pages.
that's basically your operating surplus. Yeah.
Thank you. And Your Worship, just one more follow-up, if I could. I'm just going to touch lightly on the taxes receivable, and I see that it is increasing. I'm glad to hear that you noted in your presentation that is province-wide. That's not just specific to Orangeville. And I just want to commend staff for still having that under the 10%, because it is really difficult. As a previous tax collector, I know how difficult it is to keep those tax arrears low. So I want to thank staff for that. Even though it is increasing, it's still a pretty good success story.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood, and thank you, Mr. Short, for all those answers. Was there any other questions from members of council? Not seeing any. I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you for being here again, Mr. Short. I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Okay, so we will now move into the consent agenda portion. The following items have been compiled under the consent agenda to facilitate a single vote for council consideration. Council may remove any item from the consent agenda for individual consideration. I have already gotten notice that Councillor Sherwood would like to remove 13.1.5, which is the 2026 budget review process, and Deputy Mayor Taylor has pulled 13.1.7, the administrative penalties bylaw report, as well as 13.1.8, which is the update on automated speed enforcement. Was there any other items that council wished to have discussed separately? Okay, so seeing none, the recommendation then is that all consent agenda items for the current council meeting listed under 13.1 staff reports, 13.2 correspondence, and 13.3 committee board minutes be received or approved as presented, with the exception of the items removed for individual consideration, which again are 13.1.5, 13.1.7, and 13.1.8. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Andrews, all in favor? And that is carried. Councillor Sherwood, if you want to put yourself in the queue, we will open it up for the 2026 budget review process.
Thank you, Your Worship. So one of the things, I don't really have any questions. This is more a comment opportunity and clarification for us, being council, staff, and the general public. So our mayor was very gracious in saying, I don't want strong mayor powers. I want to delegate the budget process back to staff. However, I've learned that even though the budget is delegated back to staff to present, it's still the mayor's budget because we haven't got rid of the strong mayor powers here in Orangeville. So one of the things I wanted clarification here is there's mentioned many times about the mayor still being able to veto any decisions of council. And I would like maybe staff to clarify what these changes do and how it's changing from what procedures we followed before.
I will turn it over to Ms. Martel for that. And before I turn the mic over, I just want to say I have delegated all of the components of strong mayor powers that I am able to. There are certain components within the legislation that do not allow delegation, which is why they're mentioned in here. We are doing our best as staff to work around the strong mayor powers while still having to follow the legislation. So we're trying to keep things as status quo as possible, but until the province makes the decision to rescind the legislation in its entirety, there are things that I'm not allowed to delegate, and this is one of them. So Ms. Martel, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's correct. Mayor Post and Councillor Sherwood, you're both very correct on this. So under this new process that was bestowed upon the town of Orangeville, it is still the mayor's budget. What the mayor did back on May 5th was she directed staff to prepare the budget on her behalf to present to council, which is trying to bring it back in line with what the process was prior to strong mayors. So under strong mayors, there's basically a 5-step process. The first one being the creation of the budget, which is happening. The second step would be that it gets presented to council, which if you look at the report that was prepared by Treasurer Braun, that is set to occur for December 1st. And then there's the final steps. And one of them is that council can amend the mayor's budget. So it's no different than what happened last year. You still can put resolutions to amend the budget. The difference is after council makes those amendments, the mayor can say, I veto those amendments. Then it does go back to council again for council to be able to say, well, we want to override your veto. So there's a multi-step process, but within the legislation is every one of those steps has so many days for that to occur. So what this report is trying to do is bring this back to the process that happened last year that all of council seemed to have felt went well and worked well. So it brings it back and brings it back into that timeline, again, with the budget being tabled the beginning of December, and then about a week or two later, there's the operating meeting, the capital meeting, and then there's the just-in-case meeting after that. With the recommendations presented in this report, that will make sure that it still follows those timelines, and there is a request that council is requesting that the mayor cuts back on her veto timelines because she's allowed to cut back on the veto timelines. She can't delegate anything away, but she can cut back on them. And council can reduce their timelines for their amendments too, because I think it's currently 30 days and to bring it back to the 10 days, which lines up with the timeline for the meeting. So this whole report is basically trying to get it back to what we know that council has said. They don't want the powers. They want to treat this as much as normal as prior to the powers. And that's what this report is attempting to do.
And I think it's important to note, too, that if we kept with the timelines that were outlined in the legislation, it would likely be February before we could even approve the budget. This will allow us to still, hopefully, pending how the budget comes forward, still be able to approve the budget within the month of December, as we have liked to do in the past, to make sure that, we have the benefit of our staff being able to go out to procurement on large capital projects early. And we've seen the benefits of approving a budget early, and we don't want it to be pushed back to February or March as these timelines would push it to.
So, Your Worship, just to follow up, thank you very much, Ms. Martel, for clearing that up. That's very important. So really the new thing that will come before us is, in this budget process, is the addition of the mayor being able to veto. However, we know we have a very respectful mayor here who respects the democratic policy and knows that we as a team make those decisions. I worry about this in the future, how some future mayors may use this. However, I just want to clarify that if the request from the province from our mayor is to be removed from the strong mayor powers, all of this goes away. There's no such thing as mayor vetoes and council vetoing the mayor's veto.
If the province decides to rescind the legislation.
Correct.
Yes.
If.
Yes, if. And I will keep fighting for that, but I'll leave it to Ms. Martel.
There is no indication of the province doing any further movements on the strong mayors or removing anybody that has requested to be removed. From my understanding, Mayor Post is not the only mayor in Ontario who has voiced their opinion, and there is no indication of any changes occurring.
Thank you.
Was there any other questions on this item from anybody? Okay. The recommendation is that report CPS 2025-61, the 2026 budget review process be received, and that council agree to reduce the time frame to amend the proposed 2026 budget from 30 days to 10 days as per subsection 7.4 of Ontario Regulation 530 subsection 22, and that council request that the mayor consider issuing a mayoral decision to reduce the time frame to veto a budget amendment to the proposed budget if required from 10 days to 5 as per subsection 7.7 of Ontario Regulation 530-22, and that council agree to reduce the time frame to override the mayoral veto to the proposed 2026 budget if required from 15 days to 1 day as per subsection 7.11 of OReg 530-22, and that council directs staff to schedule a special council meeting on December 1st, 2025 at 7 p.m. for the purpose of tabling the 2026 budget. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Prendergast and Councillor Sherwood, all in favor. And that is carried. Next, we will go to the administrative penalties bylaw report. I will turn the floor to Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I guess my question is for our lovely bylaw team. So we've done kind of a yeoman's work on this as time has gone on. We've had lots of presentations, public meetings, whatnot. I just wanted to cover off the preventing political interference portion of this document. And to me, I want to draw a scenario that I think is going to happen. We all live in a relatively small town. We all know a fair large portion of the population. I guarantee at a cocktail party, I am going to be approached about something that has happened that someone is not happy about. Short of contacting the integrity commissioner, which would be awkward, like, you know, play out the scenario, right? How is this going to work? And I guess what advice would you have for us as we're going through this process? Like, I see this as a problem for whomever is the local politicians as we go down this road. And I just wanted to cover that off. I'm wondering if Mr. Bramley could comment on that.
Mr. Bramley, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Post, through you and Deputy Mayor Taylor. And good evening, everybody. I'm always up here answering more questions. When it comes to the political interference and the policy we have here, the premise is that we aren't having, the intent is not having residents coming to members of council or individuals of influence to influence a decision of a screening officer or a hearing officer. This is to reflect the same judicial situation that we have that we're already dealing with in court, whereas if we are having a matter taking place in the court system, a member of council, member of influence can't go up to the justice of the peace, a member involved in that judicial situation, to provide input that would influence a decision. The point of bringing us into an in-house situation, having a screening officer who is not a provincial offenses officer, is so they don't have that bias that they were not part of investigation. The reason to have a hearing officer who is not an employee or member of the municipality is to, again, remove that level of bias, that they're an independent individual that is a part of the legal community, as generally a prosecutor or a member of the court system already, to provide a quasi-judicial scenario or situation that is held to uphold the process of law in its entirety and in a fair manner. When it comes to members coming to you bringing up concerns or complaints that this isn't fair, or they would like any input or advice, every step I would recommend them to reach out to either the officer who they've been dealing with to to handle the situation so they can have a conversation to educate them to work forward on this, on our enforcement policy. As we are progressive enforcement. We start with education first. It's only once we can't gain compliance through working with the municipality, working with the residents, we get to these next steps of enforcement where we get into the AMPS system. Again, we're more than happy to come and sit down with them, but once these penalty notices are issued and going through, we still have to provide that full process. We can't just void them on the recommendation of, say, the mayor, say the deputy mayor, or members of council. And that's the purpose of this policy, is to prevent members of influence or oversight to directly influence decisions.
So, Mayor Post, if I may. So it's the hearing officer that is the issue, because like right now, I would speak to you frequently. I got to be the big frequent flyer sitting up here, but people contact me all the time, and then I end up contacting you, and then sometimes we agree, not always, on what that would be. And I would hate to be told that that's political interference, because I think I have a right to be able to contact the bylaw division of the town and have a conversation. And I'm not over the top about it, but certainly, you know, we've not seen the same colors in an argument on occasion, right? And I think it's important that council has the ability to advocate on behalf of our residents to bylaw. But I wouldn't phone the hearing officer, and I'm aligned with that. And if that's what you're saying, then peace. But I also want to be able to phone the general managers. I want to be able to phone the CAO. You know, and whomever else that I need to talk to, you know, push forward what I think is right for the town and the resident who's followed up with me.
Absolutely, and your summary of that, it would be correct. There's no change on the relationship between yourself, myself, when discussing matters that members of public bring to your attention that want to be addressed. The political interference policy directly relates to the administrative penalty system. So once they're in that system, so if they've received a penalty notice, they're in that judicial policy or that situation where they're trying to dispute or challenge a ticket or penalty notice, members of council or anybody outside the system can't directly contact our screening officer to provide their opinion or anything on that manner to provide influence on that decision. And same with the hearing officer. They cannot reach out to them to provide their opinion. The only potential time that you could is if you're directly related to an incident where you will be a witness or an active party in a circumstance. But when it comes to speaking to officers, speaking to myself or other members of my staff relating to concerns about bylaws, concerns about interactions and what needs to be taken care of, that is completely separate, and that we can still continue moving forward on that manner and having those open discussions.
Yeah, if I may, just one last point. To me, bylaw is similar. My relationship with bylaw is similar to my relationship, and I'm looking for you to tell me that you agree, but my relationship with bylaw is similar to my relationship with the OPP. And that is, I can phone bylaw yourself, or I can phone the inspector at the OPP. At no time can I tell them what to do. I cannot say erase a ticket or, you know, put this person in jail or give this person a fine. However, I can request that something be investigated or that, you know, a speed patrol be considered for a certain area, that sort of thing. So I can suggest, I can influence, but I can't tell what to do. And I know that's a fine line, but that's how I see it. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your help.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. We're certainly on the same wavelength, because I was almost going to, almost word for word, ask the same question. I appreciate the clarity that you've provided in this rather extensive report, but more specifically on the political interference. And I think that was, very important for our general public to also hear, is that our process is that, yes, we do receive, I'm not the same frequent flyer that you have, but I receive a lot of calls, emails from people who are concerned about X, Y, and Z. So we have to relay it, and the staff takes care of it the way they take care of it. But I think that, the clarification on the influence is really well noted. One other piece there that, and again, through you, Your Worship, I know that you would have more privilege to this, but, I think many of us are aware that the ministry is, in fact, this would be Municipal Affairs, is looking at the Code of Conduct, and this is embedded in this particular document as well, where, in fact, it doesn't reference what happens in this forum. It's predominantly focusing on the forum that you're talking about, a hearing officer and the judicial process that you have. So, I think that this is really important for not only council to hear, but also the general public to understand that we're not here to influence anyone. We are really a conduit to provide, an opportunity for information to be shared and passed on to the appropriate people. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Any additional questions from members of council? Great. The recommendation is that report CPS 2025-68 administrative penalties bylaw be received, and that council consider approval of the administrative penalty bylaw, the screening and hearing officer bylaw, and the administrative penalty designation bylaw included in the bylaw portion of the meeting, and that council approve the following supporting policies for the administrative penalty program for the town of Orangeville: the appointment of the screening and hearing officer policy, the administrative penalty conflict of interest policy, the administrative penalty financial management and reporting policy, the hearing officer guide to adjudication of offenses policy, the administrative penalty preventing political interference policy, the administrative penalty public complaints policy, and the administrative penalty undue hardship policy. I think Mr. Bramley will be happy not to write another policy for a while. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Stevens. Last call for questions. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Next, we do have the update on automated speed enforcement. Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm sure we'll have a little bit of a debate here tonight, but I just wanted to start off with a couple of questions. And I did put it out on social media, hoping that our residents would be aware that we were having this discussion tonight, and we would get some followership here this evening. And clearly, it's not a big issue in town because there's not many people here. So I think that's good. So they trust council to make this decision. My question would be is the devices that we're buying supportive of the procurement policy that we have as an overarching statement being Canadian? So I'd like to know that. And then number two is, I don't have an issue with the way you framed up the report, Mr. Luce. It's very clear, and I'm excited about what you're proposing. I'm just curious if you are able at all to compare it to any of our surrounding municipalities, Fergus, Guelph, that sort of thing. And just so everybody knows, I got my third one today. It came in the mail. I got a 52 and a 40 in Wellington County. So I am a frequent flyer. So I continue to pay these things. But
Mr.
we do what we do.
Thank you, Your Worship. And first of all, Deputy Mayor Taylor, my apologies. I'll let my colleague in Centre Wellington know. To try to answer your questions, the company that we're dealing with, and I made some notes here because, frankly, I didn't think I would remember all this, but I've read it so many times I probably do. The company that we're dealing with, of course, is through LAS, who is a division of AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. They are partnering with others, of course, because they don't provide all the services. The company that we're partnering, or they're partnering with us, is Elevate, who is owned by Modaxo. They're considered a global technology company. They don't categorize themselves as a Canadian company per se. I looked at their websites trying to get some sort of an inkling as to what they were, and this is what I came up with. They do have offices in Toronto, Ontario. They do employ Canadians, and it's important to understand that the joint processing center that we'll be using will be one of two. There's one in Barrie, and there's one in, I always get this one wrong because it sounds like Rockwood, but it's Rockland, which is also in Ontario. So the joint processing centers are all Canadian. The unfortunate part is I can't tell you for sure that they're a Canadian company. They categorize themselves as a global technologies company based in Toronto. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's the best I can do at this point in time. And your other question as it relates to, I'm sorry, I seems to have misplaced the second one, or the first one actually.
It just relates to the other municipalities that are close by us, and Fergus, Guelph would be two. I'm just curious what they do and how it relates to what you presented to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for the reminder. And through you, Your Worship, every municipality is different. There's a number of different models. We presented the models to in a previous council report. There's basically municipalities that are a little larger than us that decide to purchase all the equipment, purchase all the software, become their own joint processing center. My understanding is that the County of Wellington is piloting the program for all these lower tier municipalities within Wellington County. Their process is a little different. I believe that they employ a separate company that is, I believe, Global Technologies out of the West. When I say the West, somewhere in the Alberta area. And they go through different processes. They own part of the equipment that they put up, and they lease and rent some of the equipment, and they also lease the programming that goes along with that. There's other municipalities that just turn it right over to a second party. I'm not sure how Guelph operates theirs. I did reach out to a colleague there, unfortunately hadn't heard back from him. Our process is somewhere in the middle. It's a dip your toe in the water type process that requires less commitment from the municipality. Of course, there's less revenues, but certainly it's one of those programs that we felt was of value to the municipality because it did involve a great investment on our part. So hopefully that answers your questions. If not, I'm happy to answer any others.
Thank you, Mr. Delis. Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. A couple of things. I don't really have any questions. I've received a number of emails, a number of social media posts on Facebook and things like that. There's a lot of uninformed people out there, there truly is. One of the biggest concerns, I've had people say, well, they're set for 41, so you're going to get a ticket at 41. That is not true. The municipality sets the limit. It would not be close to 41. Obviously, we're not going to tell you, and we haven't decided yet what it's going to be, but it won't be 41, I can guarantee that. I prefer to call them safety cameras because they work. They slow people down. All you got to do is go to the west of us and see Grand Valley. They put one up by the school, and nobody is going over 40 there. Another concern was damage to the cameras. Everyone's going to damage the cameras. Well, if you go to Grand Valley, you're going to have to shimmy up a 25-foot pole to get to the camera and damage it. That's not going to happen. Expenses. I hear that this is being put in place for an extra tax. Well, I personally would just as soon turn any revenue we get over to the food bank on this. We're not out for revenue, we're out for safety. And if we're spending this much money to get people to slow down, well, it's working. We could pay $150,000 to have a police officer stand there all day and get the same results, probably less because he's not going to be there after that 8 hours. But anyway, just a few thoughts on this, but I definitely support it. I think it's a safety issue. I haven't seen any excuse through all my emails, Facebook posts that say, you know what, this person's right. This is not going to work for this reason. I don't see it. I don't see anything negative in this at all. If you don't want a ticket, well, then don't speed. That's simple. I think the deputy mayor's mentioned that a number of times, and I wholly agree with him. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Councillor Sherwood, the floor is yours.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Through you to Mr. Delis. I'm looking at the timeline here, and one of the things I noticed was in November, there were going to be an advance warning sign. I'm a little concerned about the bagged part. I was hoping that you would be putting something to warn the neighborhood coming soon, almost like a place going up for sale. So the fact that they're going to be bagged, I would like to see like coming soon, and I've been to other neighborhoods where they've said, that municipal cameras are coming to the neighborhood. If we give them a lot of warning, if I look at November as being the time to put that, and then the cameras activating March or April, that gives them a lot of time to get used to the fact that, maybe we should be following what the speed limit is. So I'm a little concerned about the bagged part, and I'll go with that.
Mr. Delis, can you answer that one?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to speak to that. And the reason that I inserted that is that we know that we get winter in these parts and the ground freezes. So my thought was that we would put these signs up but bag them until we were able to remove the bags and then warn not only motorists, but the neighborhoods that speed cameras or safety cameras, as Councillor McIntosh indicated, are coming soon. So that was the reason for that was inserted. I apologize if that was one of those conflicts or one of those things that confused you, but it was meant only to be there because we want to get the signs up before the ground freezes, because we don't want to have any reason to delay the program should council approve it.
And as per the legislation, we have to have the coming soon signs for how long? Is it 3 months? We can't put them up before the 3 months, but we have to give that notice period, right?
That is correct. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Worship.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. DeLeese.
Clerk Martel is absolutely correct. She corrects me on all of these things, so I don't feel slighted at all. But certainly, we will follow the regulation and the legislation for sure. Again, the reason was that we didn't want to be putting up signs in the frost. And basically, we won't put them up any sooner or any later than we have to. We'll make sure that the minimum requirement is up before they take effect.
So what you're basically saying is there's going to be ample warning for the neighborhood. It's all of a sudden not going to be municipal cameras and bang, you're going to start getting tickets. At least it's giving a ample advance warning. Will those signs flash at all or no?
No, they typically, through you, Your Worship, they're regulatory signs that are dictated by the Ontario Traffic Act. The Highway Traffic Act and the Ontario Traffic Manuals. They're not flashing signs. They do have a blaze on them. They look coming soon, but certainly they do not flash.
So the bottom line is I take this as a whole thing as in the report, it's discussing that this is a 2-year pilot project. So nothing's guaranteed. It's a pilot project. And the cameras will stay for the full 2 years on those 2 roads. They won't go any other streets.
Through you, Your Worship, that is the current intent. I equate it to similar to leasing a car. I'm going to lease a car for 2 years. I may love it, decide to buy it out, or I may just return it. That'll be the decision of council. We'll provide council with all the data after the first year and the second year, which we are required to report to the ministries. So we'll provide that report to council so that they can make an informed decision. But at this point in time, 2-year pilot is what we're proposing.
So as my colleagues have said, if you don't speed, you don't have anything to worry about. You won't get a ticket in the mail.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Councillor Andrews, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. This has been a healthy dialogue on this particular matter, and I appreciate all that has been shared by my members of council, even from the general public too as well. Also, thank you, Mr. DeLeese, for your report. You know, I'm certainly in alignment here, and I'm going to just frame this in the following way. We're all here to ensure that our community is as safe as possible, from a pedestrian point of view, from a vehicle perspective, and so on and so forth. I've spoken about the traffic calming report that has been sitting for quite some time and no doubt has been reviewed. I think it's a combination of factors that we have to look at. Traffic calming initiatives cost money, they don't produce revenue. This does, in some capacity, or it's cost neutral. Having said that, I like what you said, Councillor McIntosh, and how you framed it. Not to negate my other members of council and what you said, but you really hit a point here. And an example is the communication to the members of our community. I had a number of phone calls in addition to emails and other ways that people get in touch with you. And what was interesting is the comments that I received, which still were dumbfounding for me to hear. How can a municipality tell me how fast I should be driving my vehicle? Well, it's not the municipality telling people how fast they should be driving the vehicle. It's in fact what the sign states in this particular community, 40K, 50K, 60, 80K, wherever it is. People either adhere or they don't. And if you don't, you end up, of course, facing the consequences. So having said that, I think what's really important is the communications component to this particular initiative. And Councillor Sherwood, you mentioned about Grand Valley and, of course, the coming soon. And I was looking at one of their information releases and talking about that, how important it was to have the coming soon sign. And I know that our clerk has indicated this is how we're going to be able to assist people to understand why this is being done. I look in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods that are not community safety zones. People ignore the speed limit. They do what they want to do until they get caught, until they end up getting another fine. And if it happens three or four, they'll eventually slow down. One other example is on Zina. Now, Zina, there is a sign on the west side going west. I forget it's past Ada. But it's there, it's been there, and I adhere to it because it flashes and it reminds me that if I'm inching a little bit over, I'm over. And that's just part of my DNA. You know, I want to adhere. I don't need another ticket. Unfortunately, we live in a society where people are critical. They think that we're doing, you know, something that's unjust, when in fact all we're asking them to do is adhere to the, you know, posted speed limit, be respectful of other people on the road, and especially in our community safety zones near our schools. So, you know, I think that the last point I wanted to make is I want to thank you for what you ended up saying after a member of our general public commented. You provided further clarification because when we read a report, or unless we reach out to a staff member, having heard what you said has really helped me to digest this and make a decision that I need to make. And it was really, really helpful. So I thank you for what you've done, and I think that all of us agree that we're here for the safety of our community, and this is one way of establishing some baseline of safety in Orangeville.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. If you indulge me, just a few things that I'd kind of forgotten about, and my council teammates here have reminded me. I think Councillor McIntosh mentioned the damage to the camera. And I know in Toronto they're having cameras on the camera and cameras on the camera that watches the camera. So I'm just curious, what happens if the camera is damaged? How will we protect the asset and ensure that it's running? And then if I could come back after that, if that's okay.
Deputy Tony, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and great question, Deputy Mayor Taylor. The nice thing about this, I mentioned value earlier. This is all on the people they're releasing the cameras from. They are going to put it in such a way that it has maximum effect and certainly is protected by vandals.
Okay. And if it is damaged, we're not on the hook for it. This company is, they're responsible, correct?
That's correct.
I just want to have it in the public.
That's correct.
To know that. The other debate I wanted to just have ever so briefly was, I love the report. I love the idea of putting, if there is additional monies once it's paid off, that it goes into a public safety fund. Mayor Creelman of Mono messaged me and said, you know, one of the things to consider is, you know, you could take that money and put it into your OPP budget as well. And, you know, it could help pay for OPP costs. So I don't know. I don't want it to look nefarious in any kind of way. I don't want it to go to, like, it needs to be a very defined thing, but I'm just wondering what people would think of that. And then if I may, just one last comment, and I'll give the microphone back, but the review of key streets, and I think I just want to clarify what you had said, and you'd mentioned, you know, there is some key offenders, and we're aware as council of who those key offenders are, like Diane Drive, Zina Street, College Avenue, Hanson, you know, I could go on. We are running surveys of those areas, and we do have the data, and a lot of those streets, you know, Diane and Zina come to mind. Cedar comes to mind. They've been done, and there isn't a need for a camera on those streets at this time, based on the data that we have. So these decisions are not being made willy-nilly. There is data that supports whether or not it should be in there. And the OPP are in favor of cameras. They're in favor of anything that will make our town safer, and that is a quote-unquote from our inspector. And I think that's the only things I wanted to say. So if anybody had any other ideas about where it should go in terms of investment, maybe it's something we discuss.
I would just comment that I like the way that the report is written with the road safety program reserve, because I think that there's some really great items in there that any additional funds would go into, such as adding crossing guards or PXOs, looking at transit safety initiatives, traffic calming measures in other areas. I think that there's some really good things that this can help fund with any of the revenues that there is. But I mean, our goal is to have it as revenue neutral. We're not looking at this as a money-making opportunity, right? Councillor Prendergast, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Post, through you. Sorry. I had one question, Mr. Delis. So I saw a resident comment, let's say perhaps if there was an extenuating circumstance, they were speeding, and perhaps they would be able to reason with a person. but not this machine and the fine that they get 2 weeks later. Let's say they have documentation and there is something that did happen. Would there be a recourse for that resident to appeal the fine?
Mr. Jalees?
Through you, your worship, to the councillor, I have a great answer for you, and I'm going to defer to the clerk on this one or bylaw, because there are screening officers and there are hearing officers.
Ms. Martel, do you want this one?
Yes, thank you. So there is a full adjudication process similar to the AP process. There are some differences. So the policies that we have for AP is not going to be the same policies for ASC because the legislation surrounding ASC is a little bit different. So you just approved a policy for the adjudication process for a hearing officer. That's not the same process. There's different parameters, and that'll come forward when the bylaw and all the associated things come forward for this project. But it will be the same adjudication process of a screening officer and then a hearing officer.
Thank you, Ms. Martel. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you again, Your Worship. I just wanted to conclude that I don't want us to lose focus on our traffic calming opportunities we have here. We do have a report that was quite extensive, and I know that this is the first step, and you just referenced it in the report itself, Your Worship. I think it's imperative that we do not lose focus, that there is some very important opportunity there, examples, and I just don't want to see that particular report sit on the shelf and be forgotten. So I made my point, but I think it's very, very important to hear that.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Stevens.
Hey, thank you, Your Worship. Mine's more of a comment. I'm going to support this. I know I emailed you earlier today, and we had a small discussion. I just feel that, in 2 years, none of us may be up here, and I really recommend that there are other streets that probably could use, a different location in the future. That's all. Okay, but I fully support this. Thank you.
Mr. Jalees, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity. And you're absolutely correct, Councillor Stevens. We will provide the information, the data, if you will, to council so that they can make the most informed decision. That's our job, and that's what we plan on doing. If council a year from now directs me to put up more cameras, I'm happy to do that as well.
And Mr. Jalees, we do also have the opportunity to move those cameras within the 2-year period to another location if we notice that the traffic patterns change. Correct?
Through you, Your Worship, to yourself, absolutely. We have that ability. There is data out there now that basically shows that the cameras should be in place for a minimum of 6 months because they're 90-day processes for warning the motoring public at large. But certainly we can move them at council's direction.
Was there anybody else who had a question or comment? Okay. I will give my commentary then at this time. There's a few things that I wanted to go over, and I think the first one that I wanted to say is that when it comes to safety and particularly speeding on residential streets, that's the #1 complaint that I get. Whether it's people not stopping at stop signs, people speeding through neighborhoods, anything to do with road safety is the #1 complaint that I get calls and emails about all throughout the community. And Council made a decision a couple of years ago to reduce the speed limit on residential roads down to 40 kilometers an hour. And if you'll recall the discussion that we had at that time about why we were changing the speed limits was because we don't want people driving on our residential streets at 55 kilometers an hour. And when the speed limit is 50, people are typically driving 55, 57, 60 even, and that's extremely fast. If a pedestrian is hit, as we learned at 60 or even 50, it becomes a very different story than if they are struck at 40. And the chance of survival for a pedestrian being struck at 40 is significantly greater. And that was one of the big reasons why council decided to reduce the speed limits down to 40. We're now exploring what we're calling a 2-year pilot program for ASE, and it's another tool. It's a tool in our toolbox that we can utilize to improve road safety in our community without spending $150,000 on each additional officer that we want to put on the roads to make sure that we've always got speed patrols in some of our worst areas. It doesn't have to be a cash grab, and I would agree that there are probably some municipalities who don't have that parameter set at the right framework. And I think Orangeville is looking to do it the right way. We want it to be a safety mechanism, not a revenue stream. And there's a few things that we've done to make sure that that happens. We've decided to go with a company or are exploring going with a company where there is minimal financial investment required. It's intended to be self-funded. We're not looking at this being a revenue stream and adding $1 million to our budget. That's not what we're looking for this to do. We've also chosen a contractor where maintenance and repairs is covered by that contractor, including vandalism. Again, this is a focus on safety and not revenue. And one of the things that myself and some of the other mayors in Dufferin County have started to do is really work with the province on advocacy about some of the legislation that's surrounding the automated speed enforcement, because there is an opportunity for the province to give us stronger, better legislation. For example, I would love to see the province stop forcing municipalities to only use automated speed enforcement in community safety zones, because what's happening now is that municipalities are unilaterally putting community safety zones where it shouldn't be, and it's creating problems and an overuse and a loss of the meaning behind what a community safety zone should be. If we have a speeding issue on a road, we should be able to put a speed camera there and deal with the issue without it being a community safety zone. I also think that the province should prevent those unreasonable ticket thresholds. There should be no reason why at 4 kilometers over you're getting a ticket. That should just not be permitted, and municipalities shouldn't allow that the province should not allow municipalities to do that, because that is a cash grab, and I wouldn't support that or us using any mechanism like that. At the end of the day, this is about protecting residents, it's about encouraging safe driving, and it's about ensuring that our streets are safer for everyone. And for that and many reasons, I will be supporting this pilot project. And in 2 years, if it's not working and there's problems with it, or the legislation is not permitting us to accomplish what we want to accomplish, we haven't invested anything in it. It's, there's no loss for us there. So with that, I will be supporting it. I'm supportive of the streets that we're starting with, and I know that there are additionals that once we do our transportation master plan that we'll be able to identify where those community safety zones are. But in the meantime, just know that I will be continuing to advocate to the province for changes to the legislation to make it even better for municipalities that are using it, and to make it more fair for the residents who are creating infractions. You don't want to get a ticket at 42 and a 40. That's unreasonable. With that, the recommendation is that report INS 2025-36, the update on automated speed enforcement, be received, and that staff be authorized to prepare and execute agreements with LAS and their partners to use the LAS automated speed enforcement service for automated speed enforcement on terms generally set out in the staff report, and that staff be authorized to prepare and execute an agreement with the Ministry of Transportation and the Ministry of the Attorney General for automated speed enforcement agreements on terms generally as set out in the staff report, and that staff be directed to begin the ASE program on a trial basis for a period of 2 years from the launch implementation of the program, and that staff be authorized to execute an agreement with LAS and to develop an administrative penalty for camera-based infractions program and supporting policies with the goal of implementation by March 1st, 2026, and that all operating costs associated with the ASE program be funded from related ASE fine revenue, and that the town of Orangeville establish a road safety reserve and transfer any incremental revenue generated in excess of the ASE operating costs to the road safety reserve to be used to fund future road safety and traffic calming initiatives. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Stevens, last call. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, Council. We will now move into the notice of motion prior to meeting. Councillor Prendergast, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Post, through you. A bit of a background on my motion. So today I'm talking about the invasive plant species, Phragmites, and all invasive species, but particularly Phragmites, which are plaguing our municipality. They threaten Orangeville's stormwater infrastructure, wetlands, and public safety. They clog drainage systems, reduce pond capacity, increase flood risk, degrade natural assets, and create visibility hazards along roadways. The town's participation in the West GTA Phragmites Management Area positions us to act in step with regional partners, share expertise, and access external funding. Many municipalities already invest in control because waiting leads to dramatically higher costs and lower success rates. The initial focus of this motion is on awareness, coordination with other partners, and prioritization in using in-kind staff resources. Any future actions with budget implications will come back to Council for consideration through the regular budget process. And now I will read my motion. All right, municipal invasive species management and Phragmites control. And I apologize, it's long. Whereas invasive plant species, particularly Phragmites australis, increasingly threaten municipal stormwater infrastructure, wetlands, and ecological integrity by obstructing drainage, reducing pond capacities, and exacerbating flood risks. And whereas the Ontario Phragmites Cost-Benefit Analysis, Green Shovels Collaborative, identified annual stormwater management costs exceeding $2 million in the GTA, with provincial ecological and economic damage surpassing $3.6 billion annually. Whereas research from the University of Waterloo demonstrates that protecting wetlands from invasive species and development can reduce flood damage in southern Ontario communities by up to 38%. Whereas the town of Orangeville has experienced repeated flooding events since 2005, emphasizing the urgent need for proactive measures and improved stormwater management strategies. Whereas Orangeville's participation in the West GTA Phragmites Management Area, with support from the CVC and additional support from Ontario Nature, positions our town within a collaborative regional effort that provides shared expertise, access to funding opportunities, and strengthened capacity for ecological resilience and invasive species management. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Orangeville direct infrastructure services in partnership with community services and planning to 1. Establish a municipal invasive species working group committed to supporting the development of a strategy focused on priority plant species, such as Phragmites australis, with specific attention to their impact on stormwater infrastructure, wetlands, and road rights of way. Number 2, retain consultants to develop and maintain a municipally controlled spatial database to map and monitor invasive species occurrences across town-managed lands, and to prepare a phased invasive species management strategy to inform efforts and funding streams. Continue to collaborate proactively with the CVC, Ontario Nature, Dufferin County, the Invasive Species Centre, and regional partners through the West GTA Phragmites Management Area to align local actions with regional efforts and funding streams. Number 4, integrate invasive species mapping and management into the town's stormwater infrastructure planning, asset management, and climate adaptation, a lot of reading. Number 5, apply to the Invasive Phragmites Control Fund and seek other external grants, partnerships, or cost-sharing models to reduce the financial burden on the municipality. And finally, number 6, report back to Council by Q4 2026 with a project status update, including mapping progress, funding outcomes, and recommendations for phased invasive species control and public engagement. And yes, we do know that invasive species do not respect our geopolitical boundaries, so this is something that's done on a regional level and has been worked on for decades, but this kind of would codify the town's position on invasives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. Very well worded motion. Can I get a seconder for Councillor Prendergast's motion? Deputy Mayor Taylor, was there any questions or comments? Oh, Councillor Sherwood, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Prendergast. One of the things you mentioned in your motion under number 2 is to retain a consultant. Any idea what we're talking cost-wise here? And I do have follow-up.
Hang on just one sec, Councillor Prendergast, because I have to boot you out for a second. Hold on. Councillor Prendergast.
That's so the cost, and it depends, because there are some of these groups that I have listed here, like the CVC, they can do mapping if possible, you know, and their cost to us might be lower. Ontario Nature can do mapping, but maybe Mr. DeLeese has a more detailed answer, perhaps with some numbers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor, I think you've answered the questions quite well. You're absolutely correct. CVC is a partner in this. We want to be in control because it's within our boundaries. The CVC is more global or regional, if you will, and certainly we understand Orangeville better than they do. So our comment through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood is that As part of the 2026 budget process, if this motion is approved tonight, we will put some details in the budget process for council's consideration. So that is our next step, next plan. We do have a plan. We just have to assign some costs to it. But if you're asking me for a number, it would be somewhere in the general area of $50,000 to $75,000 for 2026. That said, it is a commitment that will last multiple years. And my GM and acting CEO today, Mr. Koslek, and I had a conversation about that, and we thought that the best way to do that is to present that and have the details and put it into a project for council's consideration. But just to forewarn, it will have multiple years attached to it. There's a number of phases. There's mapping is the very first phase, and then there's other considerations that we would do with our partners. The biggest challenge that we're going to face is that there are phragmites that are located on private property, and how do we manage those? So those are the things that are kind of going through our mind that we don't have answers for at this point in time, but certainly with the program in place, we will have those answers for you as part of the budget process.
Your worship, that basically this will be more determined during the budget process, which is great. So when you're mentioning in your motion about reporting back to council, I would also like to see not only just the funding outcomes, but the expense as well. If that's possible, if you could amend that as well.
Are you good with that, Councillor Prendergast? Oh, yeah, hold on. Councillor Prendergast?
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Sherwood, I'm definitely okay with that. And just as previously stated, this will allow us to apply for many funding opportunities, and there are national opportunities, provincial opportunities, and it's something that we've started looking at. So we're really hopeful that through grants, we would be able to recoup 60 to 70% of this cost. You know, this is something that there's money available to it, and it's just a matter of applying. But thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much for your thoughtful notice of motion. It's certainly not the way my mind would think, so it's great that we all have different lived experiences and you would bring something like that forward. It's interesting, you know, my fellow councillor, I was thinking the same thing you were. I don't want to do anything in year, so it's great that we're going to do it in the budget year, so I think that's great. We've heard before about what consultants are, so 50 to 75 is, I know people have a reaction, but I think that's quite reasonable. But my question would be for yourself, Mr. Deluce, and for yourself, Tim, is what was your department's thinking about prior to Councillor Prendergast bringing this forward? Like, was this on your radar screen? How much work have you done? Did you guys write this notice of motion together? Are you tied, or what is your expertise saying about what we need to do here and how this was going? Like, did you already have a plan?
Mr. Koslek?
Through your worship, we do have a bit of a plan. It's one of those newer items on our work plan. We have a sustainability coordinator, and it's one of the things they're working on. They have about 10 different items they're working on, but this is one area of quite a bit of interest. We are doing work on our stormwater ponds. We're seeing more of the effect. We're trying to look at some of the funding opportunities, and a lot of the big things in the funding opportunities, you have to identify your issues where you have invasive species to be able to get funding. So a lot of it, we got to do it in baby steps. Do the mapping first, know the issues we have. Hopefully we can get funding to try and address it. It's not going to be a one-year program. It'll probably go 10 or 15 years, because I think when you eradicate from one area, it may come back. So it'll be a multi-year program. But we're hoping once we've identified the items and be able to work on it, we'll be able to develop a program for it. We may be required to bring a specialized person in to be able to treat the phragmites, but that's something we'll develop as time goes on. We're looking at 26, we'll do the mapping, we'll develop a bit of a plan, and then we can bring it forward for 27 and future years for the implementation. Yep.
Was there any other questions by members of council? Okay, seeing none, we have a mover and a seconder, and we will call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you again, Councillor Prendergast. Was there any notices of motion at tonight's meeting? No, seeing none. Okay, we will move into announcements. Councillor Andrews, your mic is on.
Yes, it is. This Friday, the second annual Dufferin Film Festival arrives in town. Opportunity for those that are interested in independent short films. Our library is also involved with a couple of speakers, keynote speakers on Saturday. So looking forward to participating in again, representing council. I think other members of council may be attending, but great opportunity to see some of those burgeoning filmmakers maybe getting their first start and first showing here in Orangeville.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Was there any other announcements? Seeing none. I have a couple. I got notice today from the Northman minor box lacrosse teams that they just finished up at provincials, which were 10 days. There was 451 teams represented, over 8,500 players and coaches. They played a total amongst those 451 teams of 933 games were played. And out of all of that, our under 11A team won gold out of 96 teams in that division, which is extremely impressive. And our under 22B team also won gold, beating Six Nations 7-3 in the finals. So congratulations to our Northman teams. That's absolutely amazing. And lastly, I just wanted to note to anybody who may be interested in the recent appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal regarding the York Street application, I'd just like everybody to stay tuned because our staff team right now is working on putting together an education session on how you, as an interested party, can either participate or follow the process. So there will be information coming in the next little while from our staff. So just keep an eye out for that. Was there any other announcements? We're all good. Okay, we will move into bylaws. The recommendation is that all bylaws for the current council meeting listed under item 17 be read 3 times and finally passed. That is 17.1 through 17.5 inclusive. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor Andrews, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor McIntosh, seconded by Deputy Mayor. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you.